Hello, team players. Got another tier list for you. I did ask you guys what tier list you guys wanted next, and it was very close between 4 of the 5 options I gave you guys. But I've decided to go with Cleric Domains. However, there are over 60 Cleric Domains in this system, which obviously means I'm not going to be able to cover all of them in one video. So today, it's just the first 15. Let's dive in. For these domains, I'm only going to be going over the focus spells you can gain from these domains, not the extra spells that clerics of these deities can gain. In addition, I'm going to be grading each of the domain spells, including the apocryphal spells, if the domain has them, and the overall grade of the domain. I will, however, be putting the deities that are associated with these domains on screen. We're going to start with a very good one with the Abomination domain. No apocryphal spell here, but we do get to start with Lift Nature's Call. This spell targets all creatures in a 5-foot emanation around you. Aberrations and worshippers of outer gods or great old ones get a +1 bonus on will saving throws and attack rolls for the next minute. Everyone else in the area must make a will saving throw. On a successful saving throw, they are sickened 1. On a failure, the target is stupefied 1 for 1 minute and frightened 1. If they critically fail, they're stupefied 1 for 1 minute and frightened 2. They also can't reduce their frightened condition below 1 while they are stupefied by this spell. If you have the right party, that +1 to will saves and attack rolls can be great. Obviously, this is not something you want to use on aberrations that you're going up against. However, this is one of the few spells that I've actually seen that you actually want the target to either succeed or critically fail, as those two have the best effects. Yes, if the target succeeds on their saving throw, it actually makes them sickened 1, which is one of the best effects of this spell. That alone makes me give this focus spell an A. But the other effects are good too, especially if spellcasters fail or critically fail against the spell. Of course, then we gotta talk about Fearful Feast. This spell requires a reaction that is triggered when a creature within 30 feet is frightened. The target must make a will saving throw against mental damage. This is essentially a basic save with a few extra effects. On a failure or critical failure, you regain hit points equal to half what the target takes. And on a critical failure, they also increase their frightened condition by 1 to a maximum of frightened 4. This spell used to be a lot better, but the most recent version of this spell gets a B. Increasing their frightened condition by 1 if they critically fail is good. And getting extra hit points back is good, especially for War Priest clerics. However, since now it only increases the frightened condition on a critical failure, and it requires your reaction, this one gets a B. It's good, but the older version of this spell was insane. Overall, I gotta give the Abomination domain an A-. It's got good spells, but that second one could be better. Now, let's go a little bit down with the Air domain. With Pushing Gust, you can target one creature within 500 feet and force them to make a Fortitude saving throw. On a successful saving throw, they're pushed 5 feet away from you. A failure is 10 feet. A critical failure is 10 feet and they land prone. This is great for cloister clerics because they don't want enemies near them. And even pushing an enemy 5 feet away from you means they may have to use an action to move back up. And critical failure is even better because they also land prone, which effectively means if you use this on a melee attacker, then they have to spend an action getting back up because they're prone, which of course will provoke a reactive strike from anyone who has it. And if you push them far enough away from you, they'll have to move back up to attack you again, which effectively means you just made them waste 2 actions. This one gets a B. It's good, but the problem is it targets their Fortitude save. and a lot of enemies have good fortitude. The advanced domain spell is called Disperse into Air. If you take damage from an enemy or a hazard, you can use a reaction to transform into air. Until the end of the current turn, you can't be attacked or targeted, you don't take up space, but you also can't act, and any auras that you have are suppressed until you reform. At the end of the turn, you reform in any space within 15 feet of where you were dispersed. Any auras or emanations you had that were suppressed during the duration of this spell are restored as long as their duration didn't run out while you were dispersed. This effectively means that once an enemy attacks you, they can't anymore for the rest of their turn. You can't act, but that doesn't matter because you're doing it on the enemy's turn, so you wouldn't be able to act anyway. This one gets a B, but only because it only lasts for one enemy's turn. I would honestly be okay if it lasted for a full round. Sure, you wouldn't be able to act on your turn, but it also would mean that enemies wouldn't be able to attack you that round. And the fact that this lets you move 15 feet as part of the spell is pretty amazing too. As again, if enemies want to attack you, they gotta move up. Definitely a good spell, it's just kind of limited. This domain does have an advanced apocryphal spell called Wind Whispers. It takes 1 hour to cast and has a range of 1 mile. This spell effectively allows you to create rumors. You make a check using your spell DC minus 10 against a hard DC for your level. If you critically succeed, for 1 week, anyone who tries to gather information in the area learns of the rumor, in preference to any other rumors about the subject. Also, anyone who tries to convince the target that the rumor is true gets a +2 bonus on the check. On a success, the bonus to convince someone that the rumor is true is a +1. Failure is, of course, no effect, and critical failure means a contradictory rumor spreads, and you take a -2 penalty on checks to convince someone that the rumor is true. This one gets a C. It's just way too situational. You would use this out of combat, but honestly, I've never run into a situation where you would need to spread a rumor. But maybe that's just in my game. I still think this spell is too situational. Overall, the air domain gets a B-. The first 2 spells, the ones you're probably going to get from this domain, are pretty good. That apocryphal spell is just way too situational. Next, we gotta talk about the Ambition domain. With Ignite Ambition, if you or an ally attempt to convince a creature within 60 feet to do something, as a reaction, you can force the creature to make a will saving throw. On a successful saving throw, the target takes a -1 penalty against the triggering effects. If the creature is being influenced to follow its own ambitions, it takes a -2 penalty instead. The creature doesn't realize that you tried to cast a spell on it. On a failure, the penalty is -4 if the target is being influenced to follow its own ambitions. On a critical failure, the target automatically follows the suggestion if it advances its own ambitions. This domain spell gets a B. It's really good, but only if you know what the ambitions of your target are, as you may be able to convince them to do something that advances their own ambitions, but also hurts them. For example, making them waste actions doing that. However, if you don't know what your target's ambitions are, this is incredibly situational. It's absolutely an A spell if you know what your target's ambitions are. But it's really more of a C if you don't, which is why this gets a B. The advanced domain spell for this domain is Competitive Edge. You gain a +1 bonus to attack rolls and skill checks. If an enemy within 20 feet of you critically succeeds on an attack roll or skill check, this bonus increases to +3 for attack rolls or that specific skill check, whichever one the enemy critically succeeded at for 1 round. This one gets a C. +1 to attack rolls and skill checks is pretty good. However, if we're talking clerics, it only works well for War Priest clerics. But that relies on the enemy critically succeeding on something. And remember, if you're doing a skill check, it has to be whatever one the enemy critically succeeded at, which you may or may not be great at. Plus, this spell only works on you, nobody else. Can be good, but really situational. The apocryphal spell for this domain is Hollow Heart. Target one creature within 30 feet who must make a will saving throw. On a success, the target treats no one as their ally for 1 round. On a failure, this lasts for 3 rounds. On a critical failure, the target also is frightened 1 as it realizes that it can't rely on anyone else. This is actually really good for boss fights, especially if a minion is buffing the boss. As if the minion doesn't treat the boss as an ally, then it won't buff it. However, for most encounters, it's not going to be great. So I gotta give this one a B. So overall, the Ambition domain for me gets a B-. The first domain spell you get is good, and the Apocryphal spell is pretty good too. But that competitive edge is just okay. It's not great. For the Change domain, we have Adapt Self. For 1 minute, you gain one of the following options. If you're in water, you gain a swim speed equal to half your land speed. Or you can also choose to be able to breathe water. If it's too dark for you to see, then you gain dark vision. And finally, if you're in an environment that has severe heat or cold, you are protected from that severe heat or cold, and the spell lasts for 10 minutes. Unfortunately, 3 of these options are really situational. However, if you don't already have dark vision, then that dark vision option is really good. But the fact that 3 of the options are very situational, and the spell only affects you, makes this spell get a C. It's just decent. And honestly, Adaptive Ablation isn't much better. As a reaction, if you take acid, cold, electricity, fire, or sonic damage, you gain resistance 5 to that energy type for the spell's duration. However, this does not apply to the triggering damage. It only applies to future damage you take during the spell's duration. Again, this one is a C. Number 1, it only affects you. Number 2, it doesn't apply to void damage. And 3, you gotta use your reaction for this. If your enemy has this type of damage, it's good. Otherwise, this is completely useless. The Change domain gets a C. Its focus spells are just way too situational. Adapt Self isn't gonna come up very much at all. And Adaptive Ablation simply helps you stay up, which is a good teamwork thing, but it's specifically energy damage, and when you get the spell, there's not going to be much of that. Okay, for the Cities domain, we have Face in the Crowd. You gain a +2 bonus on Deception and Stealth checks to go incognito in a crowd. You also ignore difficult terrain caused by crowds. This spell counts as setting up a disguise for the impersonate use of Deception, and you get to add your level to the Deception check even if you're untrained in Deception. And later on, you can target up to 10 creatures within 10 feet with this spell. This spell takes 1 action to cast. Its best use is out of combat to hide from people. For example, hide from the guards. But because this spell takes 1 action, you can use it in certain situations to get out of combat. And as I said before, running away can be a good option. Overall, this spell gets a B. Unfortunately, it's only useful when a crowd is around, which is most likely going to be in an urban environment. This spell is basically useless if you're in, say, a natural environment. The advanced domain spell for this domain is Pulse of Civilization. Depending on what rank you cast this spell at, you learn the names of all settlements within anywhere from 25 miles to 500 miles. In addition, for the next 8 hours, you get a +2 bonus on all recall knowledge checks and all checks to gather information in or about those settlements, and you can add your level as a proficiency bonus even if you're untrained. In addition, when you cast this spell, you can immediately make a recall knowledge check using the appropriate lore skill, which benefits from this bonus. If you want to learn about cities that are in your area, this is a fantastic spell to use. It's more of an out-of-combat thing, but not all good spells are combat-related. And the fact that the Recall Knowledge is a lore skill, that means you're going to get a lower DC as well. This spell gets an A, definitely. Overall, the city's domain gets a B+. Force of Civilization is very good, but Facing the Crowd is incredibly situational. Don't get me wrong though, Facing the Crowd can be really good when you can actually use it, but it really depends on your campaign. Next we've got the Cold Domain. First we've got Winter Bolt. Make a spell attack roll against one creature within 60 feet. The Winter Bolt deals 1d8 piercing damage and lodges in the target. At the end of the target's next turn, the bolt shatters and deals 1d12 damage to the target and all creatures within 5 feet of it. The bolt can be removed with a single interact action, which causes it to melt harmlessly. On a critical success on the spell attack roll, the bolt deals double damage and it takes the target 2 interact actions to remove it. And on success, of course, you deal the full damage. It may seem like this spell only does damage, so you probably think I'm going to give this one a D, or maybe a C, but you're wrong. Because the target can spend 1 or maybe 2 actions removing the bolts, this actually has the potential to waste enemy actions, which makes me give this spell an A. And the fact that if they don't remove it, this spell can hit multiple enemies makes this amazing as well. And because this deals piercing and cold damage, it bears a chance that the enemy is going to be weak to one of those, if not both. Never thought I'd give a spell like this an A, but here we are. Then we come to Diamond Dust. This spell targets a 15-foot emanation centered on you. Any creature other than you that enters this aura or ends their turn in the aura must make a basic fortitude save against cold damage. A creature can only take this damage once per turn. If a light enters the area, then all creatures affected gain a +2 bonus to their armor class and saves against this spell. While this spell is going on, you can activate or suppress it at any time by spending a single action with the concentrate traits. You can also dismiss this spell. This one is pretty good too. You too have to be careful about allies in the area as they are going to take this damage too. But this is a good way to keep enemies from attacking you, assuming there isn't light around. And if allies are willing to take a little damage, that +2 to AC can help a lot. This one gets a B. Overall, the Cold Domain gets a B+. It's really good, but Diamond Dust is kind of situational. With the Confidence Domain, you gain the Veil of Confidence focus spell to start off with. When you cast this spell, you immediately reduce your frightened condition by 1. In addition, for the next minute, anytime you would become frightened, reduce that condition by 1. If you critically fail a save against a fear effect, this spell reduces that frightened condition and then ends. This one gets a B. Frightened is one of the most debilitating debuffs in this entire system, so reducing it by 1 can help you better help your team. However, because this spell only works on you and only reduces the frightened condition by 1, I can't give it an A. Especially since most characters that are going to be able to cast this spell have high will saves. Especially clerics because their wisdom is so high. Moving on, we have Delusional Pride. Target one creature within 30 feet. They must make a will saving throw. If they succeed on their saving throw, then anytime during the next round, if they fail an attack roll or skill check, then they take a -1 penalty on attack rolls and skill checks until the end of their turn, or the end of its next turn if it made the roll outside of its turn. If it fails a second time, the penalty is -2. If it fails, this lasts for 10 minutes. If it critically fails, this lasts for 24 hours. This spell is really good. If you can get that 10 minutes effect, this lasts for basically the entire combat. The critical failure effect can be useful, but
I'm afraid 10 minutes is plenty, especially if you use this in combat. Overall, this one gets an A. It does rely on enemies missing or failing skill checks, which is why it doesn't get an A+. But them being affected by this spell means every time they miss, they have a greater chance of missing, which makes getting that -2 easier and easier. Fantastic spell here. This domain does have an advanced apocryphal spell. With Shaken Confidence, if an enemy within 30 feet quickly fails an attack roll, perception check, or skill check, you can use a reaction to make them roll a will save. If it fails the will save, the next time that they attempt the same check that triggered this spell, they must roll twice and take the worst results. If the target doesn't attempt any qualifying skill checks, then the spell ends at the end of the target's next turn. This is a really good spell, but it does have some downsides. For example, they have to use the same check that they used before that they critically failed on to be affected by this spell. Second, they have to fail on the saving throw. Success is unaffected. And of course, it does take up your reaction for that round. Overall, this one gets a B. The Confidence domain gets a B+. Delusional Pride is incredibly good, but the other two are a little bit situational. With Creative Splash from the Creation domain, you target a 5-foot burst within 30 feet and roll 1d4. The 1d4 determines the color of the illusion you create. All creatures in the area must make a will saving throw. Creatures that fail or critically fail are dazzled, enfeebled, frightened, or clumsy, depending on the color of the illusion. Obviously, the best one for you to get is yellow, so this does require a little bit of luck. However, each one of these debuffs will help you in some way, regardless of what creature you use this spell on. But how well this spell works on certain creatures is determined by luck, which is why this spell does not get an A. The advanced domain spell for this domain is Artistic Flourish. This allows you to change one item or work of art that fits entirely within 15 feet of you into either a weapon or a skill tool. The effect is obviously magical and temporary, so the value of the item does not change. If you are at least an expert in crafting, the item gains item bonuses if used as a weapon or a skill tool. This is another B. Although this spell is very versatile and can be used on just about any item, it requires that you have an actual item to use the spell on. Meaning if you're in a natural environment, the spell may be completely useless. I'm giving Creation overall a B. It has good spells, but since one relies on luck and the other relies on having a qualifying item, these spells aren't as good as they could be. Now we come to one of my personal favorite domains, the Darkness domain. With the Cloak of Shadows spell, you touch one willing creature and give them, well, a Cloak of Shadow. The cloak reduces bright light within 20 feet to dim lights. The target of this spell can use the concealed condition gained from this cloak to hide. However, enemies can still see the aura of shadow, making it difficult for the target to become completely undetected. The target can also use an interact action to take off the cloak and leave it behind as a decoy. But if anyone picks up the cloak after it's been removed, it completely dissipates and the spell ends. This spell gets an A. A rogue will love you if you cast this spell on him. In addition, anyone can use this concealment to hide. Obviously, the best ones to cast this spell on are going to be rogues and rangers. But something like a champion can benefit from this spell if they want to. Overall, great spell here. Then we've got Darkened Sights. You target one creature within 60 feet, and for the next minute, they have greater dark vision. There are very few characters that won't benefit from greater dark vision. Those, of course, being the ones that already have greater dark vision. But this spell works especially well on creatures that don't get dark vision at all, as it's pretty hard to function in a dark environment without dark vision. This one definitely gets an A as well. And then we have the apocryphal spell, Isolation. You target one creature within 30 feet and force them to make a will saving throw. On a success, for the next 3 rounds, that target becomes invisible, but only to its ally. Other creatures can see it normally. See invisibility and effects like that allow the target's allies to see them. The target's allies still know that the target is present and can see the effects of any of its action. On a failure, the target is inaudible and also imperceivable to their ally. Unfortunately, this apocryphal spell gets a C. It's only really helpful if a group of enemies are helping one target. And even then, if they succeed on the saving throw, then their allies still know they're there and know approximately where they are based on the effects of their actions. Which effectively means if the target succeeds on their saving throw, they're still going to be able to be helped out. It's only on a failure that this spell becomes good. Overall, though, I'm giving Darkness an A. The 2 spells you're probably going to get if you have this domain are really good. It's just that apocryphal spell that's okay. Now let's talk about the Death Domain. With Death's Call, as a reaction, if a living creature within 20 feet of you would die, or an undead creature in that area would be destroyed, you can gain temporary hit points equal to the creature's level, plus your spellcasting attribute modifier. These temporary hit points are doubled if the creature was undead. These last for 1 minute, or until the temporary hit points are depleted. There is a very specific and very good interaction between this spell and one of the really good feats from the Reanimator archetype. However, other than that, this spell is not going to be used very much, as it does require a reaction and a focus points. The best use of this feat is when you run into undead. Or, of course, you use undead yourself. And you're not going to be running into undead all that much unless you're in an undead campaign. Overall, this one gets a C. With Eradicate Undeath, you target a 30-foot cone, and all undead in that cone must make a basic fortitude save against 4d12 vitality damage. That's it. This is just damage to undead. Don't get me wrong, it's really good damage to undead, and it's a 30-foot cone, so you can infect multiple creatures with it. The problem is, it's just damage, and it's only damage against undead. I'm already not a huge fan of spells and abilities that just do damage. But this is even worse because it only targets undead. This one gets a D in my book. And of course, the apocryphal spell for this domain is Euphorical Renewal. For the next 10 minutes, each time you gain the dying condition and are brought back up, you gain 3 benefits. You are quickened on your next turn, but can only use the extra action to stand. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to saves for a minute, and you gain 8 temporary hit points for a minute. There are so many things wrong with this spell, it's actually kind of ridiculous. First of all, it requires you to go into dying and be brought back up. Second, the beneficial effects of this spell are very minor, and definitely not worth going into dying for. And of course, the third thing is, it only affects you. The benefits of this spell are not worth the downsides. So this one gets a D as well. Overall, I gotta give Death Domain a D. The only domain spell that's any good in this domain is Death's Call. And that's only if you're a Necromancer. Otherwise, I would avoid this one. For the Decay domain, we'll start with Withering Grasp. You make a melee spell attack roll against one creature or object. This spell deals 1d12 negative damage and 1d4 persistent negative damage. If the creature uses something like a shield to block this, the item is automatically affected, but the creature doesn't take any damage. Unlike normal negative damage, this does affect objects. On a critical success, you deal double damage, both the initial and the persistent. In addition, if your target is an object, reduce its hardness by 4 for 1 minute. On a success, the target takes the full damage, and if it's an object, the hardness is reduced by 2 for 1 minute. This spell can be good if you use it on an object that a creature has. For example, that shield. However, against a creature, this is just damage. And like I said before, I'm not a huge fan of spells that just do damage. I'm giving this spell a C. With Fallow Field, you target a 15-foot emanation within 60 feet. If a creature within that area would regain hit points through something like a heal spell or through the regeneration ability, it must make a will saving throw. On a failure, the target only receives half the healing it would have. On a critical failure, the target receives no healing at all. Unfortunately, in most cases, all this spell does is give you and your allies a 15-foot emanation that you need to avoid, as regeneration, healing, and the like are actually pretty rare when it comes to facing enemies. But what this does do is affect everyone in the area, not just the enemies. Which means, yeah, it's just an area that you and your allies have to avoid. Not a good spell at all. Overall, the Decay domain gets a D. It's just not a good domain. I would definitely avoid this one. For the Delirium domain, we start with Hyper Focus. You target one creature within 30 feet. If you choose an enemy, that enemy must make a will saving throw. If you choose an ally, they can choose the outcome. The target gains a +1 bonus to perception checks attempted with any of their precise senses. Also, any of their imprecise senses become precise senses, but they don't gain the bonus. However, the target also cannot perceive anything beyond 20 feet. On a success, the creature is affected for 1 round. On a failure, they're affected for 1 minute. On a critical failure, they're affected for 1 minute, but they can't detect anything beyond 10 feet. This is great to use on enemies because then the party can sneak past them as long as they don't come within 20 feet. And of course, the target doesn't critically succeed on their saving throw. But this also works really well on allies, especially if the party is looking for something. Remember that allies choose the outcome. So if they're looking for something in a room, it shouldn't matter that they can't see anything beyond 20 feet. This spell 100% gets an A. It's just way too good outside of combat, whether you use it on enemies or you use it on your allies. And of course, we do have our advanced domain spell, Ephemeral Hazards. You can target 4 10-foot by 10-foot spaces within 60 feet. You create a mental projection of hazards in those spaces. Each time a creature touches one of these hazards or is occupying a space that has one of these hazards, they make a will saving throw against 4d6 mental damage. To cast this spell, choose bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, acid, cold, electricity, fire, or sonic damage. Weaknesses and resistances to those damage types apply if the target thinks they do, which of course is determined by the GM. You choose the appearance of the hazards as long as it reflects the type of damage it deals. On success, the target realizes that the hazards aren't real, but still takes half damage. On future will save, it uses this result as long as it doesn't get a critical success. On a failure, the target takes the full damage and treats the square as if it were difficult terrain. On a critical failure, the target takes double damage and can't pass through a square that contains a hazard. This spell is really good, but it does have some downsides. For one, this does affect allies, so you do have to be careful about when you cast this spell. Also, this spell deals mental damage, which is non-lethal damage, essentially meaning you're damaging their mind and not their actual body. Overall, this spell gets a B. It's good, but has limitations. Delirium Domain gets an A-. It's got good focus spells, but that second one is situational. Okay, next we have the Destruction Domain. First up is Cry of Destruction. This spell has an area of a 15-foot cone. Everyone in the area must make a basic fortitude save against 1d8 sonic damage. If you've already damaged that creature with a strike this round, then the damage of this spell increases to 1d12 per spell rank. Again, not a huge fan of spells that just do damage. But I am giving this one the benefit of the doubt because it does do a rare type of damage, that being Sonic. So this one gets a C. Next, of course, we have Destructive Aura. You create a 15-foot emanation around yourself that lasts for 1 minute. Reduce the resistances of you and all creatures in the area by 2. This one can be very good, especially if the enemy has a resistance that the party can't really get over, such as resistance to physical damage. However, this can hurt you and the party if you have resistance. So this one gets a B. It's definitely good, but it does have downsides. Overall, Destruction gets a C+. One of the options just does damage, and the other one is kind of situational. You might take this one if you think you're going to run into a lot of creatures with resistances, but otherwise, not really worth it here. Okay, we've got 2 left for this video, starting with the really good Dreams domain. With 3 dreams, you can target 1 willing creature within 30 feet. This spell lasts for 1 hour. When you cast this spell, the target falls unconscious if it isn't already. While unconscious, it experiences a dream of your choice, but it can wake up when it chooses to. The spell ends if the target wakes up before 1 minute passes. Choose one of the following options. With the Dream of Insight, the target gains a +1 bonus to intelligence-based skill checks. If you choose the Dream of Glamour, they get a +1 bonus to charisma-based skill checks. And if you choose the Dream of Voyaging, they get a +5 bonus to their speed. This spell is insane. They only need to be asleep for 1 minute, and the spell lasts for 1 hour. And the Dream of Insight is really good if a party member needs to make recall knowledge checks. And if a party member really wants to be good at intimidation, choose the Dream of Glamour. The Dream of Voyaging is also really good if you want to speed a party member up. You do essentially have to cast this outside of combat, even though it is a 2-action spell. But because this spell lasts for 1 hour, you can get a lot of use out of this before it ends. Highly recommend this spell. Next we have Dreamer's Call. You target 1 creature within 30 feet who must make a will saving throw. This spell lasts until the end of the target's next turn. On a success, the target is fascinated by the daydream that you create for it with this spell. On a failure, they're fascinated and must pursue one of the following courses of action of your choice. Approach the daydream, run away from it as if it had the fleeing condition, release what it's holding as an offering, or fall prone in obstinance. It must spend its first action doing one of those things. On a critical failure, the target must spend as many actions as possible doing what you chose. And it can do nothing else. The fascinated part of this spell doesn't really matter. But all those options that they have to do for at least 1 action, if they at least fail their saving throw, essentially just waste their actions. And remember, if they critically fail, they're doing basically nothing that turn. This one definitely gets an A as well. I definitely give the Dream Domain an A+. If you're a Cloistered Cleric of Desna or a similar deity, you definitely want to pick up this domain first thing. And now we come to the last domain for this video, the Dust Domain. With the Parch spell, you target 1 creature within 60 feet who must make a Fortitude saving throw. If the creature has the water trait or is primarily made of liquid, such as an ooze, they get 1 degree of success worse on their saving throw than what they actually rolled. Creatures without significant moisture, such as earth elementals, are immune to this spell. On a successful saving throw, the target takes a -1 penalty to all its checks and DCs for 1 round. On a failure, this lasts for 1 minute. On a critical failure, the penalty is -2 for 1 minute, and the target is dazzled as long as it's taking this penalty. If the affected creature drinks a liquid, such as a potion, the spell ends. Creatures that have the water trait or are primarily made of water, or can't drink a liquid, can end this spell as a 2-action activity. So either way, they are taking a penalty, basically everything, or they're wasting 2 actions to end it. Because even if they can drink a liquid, they have to pull it out and then drink it. This one 100% gets an A, as this is just a better version of the Frightened condition. The only reason that this spell does not get an A+ is because it doesn't work on things like Earth Elementals or most Golems. But this does work on a lot of things. Then of course we have the Advanced Domain spell for this domain, Dust Storm. You target a 20-foot radius burst within 120 feet. This spell has the effects of Obscuring Mist, meaning creatures are concealed. The dust also makes the air unbreathable, meaning creatures in the area must hold their breath. Creatures entering or starting their turn in the dust storm take 1d6 slashing damage. Creatures that have the water trait or are primarily made of liquid take double damage. Unfortunately, the Obscuring Mist thing actually makes it harder for you to target enemies in the storm. The fact that they have to hold their breath while they're in there really doesn't matter unless they're having a hard time getting out of there. Other than that, this spell just does damage. This one gets a C. It's okay, but not great. Overall, the Dust Domain gets a B. The first focus spell you get is absolutely amazing against most creatures, but the Advanced Domain spell is pretty situational, as the enemies that are in the area take damage, sure, but they're also concealed to the entire party. And this really hurts melee attackers because if they enter the area, they're going to take damage. And it isn't a sustained spell. Once you cast it, it stays there for pretty much the entire combat. So, okay, but not great. And that's all the domains I'm going to cover in this video. I expect it's going to take me another 3 videos to get through all the domains. So, if you guys want those videos early, you can become a member of this channel or become a team leader or higher on my Patreon. Just like these people here. If you're more interested in a tier list on Oracle Mysteries, you can check out this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.